Greetings from Knoxville, Tennessee. James Agee, journalist, critic, novelist and screenwriter, won the Pulitzer Prize after his death for his autobiographical novel A Death in the Family. The story describes downtown Knoxville in 1916, including memorable scenes along Gay Street, Market Square, and his childhood neighborhood, Fort Sanders, where today you can visit James Agee Park, honoring one of the city's most beloved writers, from your friends at the Knoxville History Project.
Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Karen Williams, and I'm here hosting this session with Julie Clark and Jennie Fields on behalf of Humanities Tennessee. This is the 32nd year for the Southern Festival of Books. I'm a former board member with Humanities, and it's my pleasure to welcome you. And first of all, I want to thank our sponsors, our key sponsors, Metro Nashville Arts Commission, the Ingram Content Group, Tennessee Arts Commission, Vanderbilt University, and Parnassus Books. So don't forget that you can purchase books for any of the authors at the festival on parnassusbooks.com. And you can also make a contribution to Humanities Tennessee at humanitiestennessee.org. So I'm thrilled to be in a conversation today with two brilliant writers who have written books about strong women. Two women in the present Me Too movement and time period, and one from the post-World War II movement in World War II time in 1950. Julie Clark was born and raised and still lives in Santa Monica, California, in the Los Angeles area, where she's a mother of two boys and a fifth grade teacher. She grew up reading books on the beach while everyone else surfed. She attended college at the University of the Pacific and worked in an athletic department at the University of California in Berkeley for a while. Her latest book that we'll be talking about today is The Last Flight. And this is what it looks like, The Last Flight. Our other author is Jennie Fields. Jennie is a native of Chicago. Her mother worked as a university-trained biochemist in the 1950s, and she received Jennie, excuse me, that's going to be hard, Jennie and Julie. Jennie received a Master of Fine Arts from the Iowa Writers Workshop, and she currently lives here in Nashville with her husband. Her fifth book is Atomic Love, and that's what we'll be talking about today. So let's get to know our authors and give you an opportunity to tell us about what inspired you to write your book and about some of the main characters. So Julie, would you like to begin?
Sure, absolutely. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me. The Last Flight is a story of female empowerment. And what I really wanted to do was explore the idea of a reliable female narrator, not sort of what we read a lot in, especially the thriller genre. When I was drafting this book, it was really kind of around the beginning of the Me Too movement. And as I was revising it, it became more and more clear to me that this was a book that needed to be told, or a story that needed to be told. And I really wanted to explore the idea of a woman on the run, and a woman who wanted to vanish, who wants to disappear, and whether that's even possible in the 21st century, with all of the technology that we have. I'm always very curious to know, can you disappear? So I did a lot of research and put my characters in some interesting situations, and I have them trading plane tickets at an airport. My character Claire flying to Oakland as Eva, and Eva flying to Puerto Rico as Claire. And when Claire lands in Oakland and discovers that the Puerto Rico flight crashed, it's not just a head start, but it's a new start for her. And so I really kind of went with the story from there, but all the while keeping in mind that Claire and Eva are both powerful women in their own right who have maybe made choices that didn't turn out the way they'd hoped, but that they are strong and savvy, and the reader really is rooting for them the entire way through.
Great, thank you. Jennie, so your book is also about a strong woman, so but from a different time, day and time. So tell us about your characters and what inspired you to write the book.
So Atomic Love is about a woman who was a scientist on the Manhattan Project. And there really was a woman in that phase in Chicago of the Manhattan Project who was a nuclear scientist. And it was inspired, first of all, by my mother, who was a biochemist in the late 1940s. And, she told us that she had done some really important cancer research and her name was on an important cancer paper. And we all said, yeah, sure, Mom. And, it was just recently I found out how important that cancer paper was. It was still referred to 20 years after she wrote it. And yet when she got married, she was required pretty much to give up her job. And it was something she regretted her entire life and was a very painful subject for her. So I wanted to write about a woman in science at that time who has to give up her job. When the GIs came back, they didn't think women should be working. As soon as you married, you were expected to give up your job. Also, her cousin worked on the Manhattan Project, and it was her best friend, and she would never speak about what she was doing. It was a big secret. And, that silence really intrigued me. I wanted to know more about it. And then I also wanted to write about that era because a lot of people have written about World War II, but a lot of people, there's very few books about the time after World War II. Mm-hmm. And when you think of the 50s, you think of it as, oh, such a happy time, everybody was married and had 2.5 kids and they, had their own houses and their own cars. But really what was going on was a lot of men came back with horrible PTSD. Mm-hmm. A lot of women had given up jobs that meant a lot to them and were brokenhearted about it. Even though they couldn't speak about it, they were expected to be happy to give dinner parties. And so I wanted to capture that era and a sense of all the silence and secrets and sadness underneath the smiles.
Great. Well, that you sort of answered my first question is, do you know any people who have experienced similar situations as these women? Jennie, you already answered that. Yes, your mother did. So Julie, how about you?
No. I think that I've known abused women. I think it's something that's not really spoken about. I'm sure that there are people in my circle of friends that have experienced, physical abuse. But it's not something that people talk a lot about. I did a lot of research about kind of what that psychology is. And, the thing that I really would like people to take away from the book is that, anybody can find themselves in an abusive relationship. It doesn't happen to a certain kind of person. You don't have to be a certain level of intelligence. It happens to anybody, everywhere. And it often creeps up on you in a relationship until it's too late to extract yourself, or until it's no longer easy to extract yourself. So, thankfully, I don't have any firsthand experience with that, but I do feel like there are more women out there who have lived through some form of abuse than we probably are even aware of.
Yeah. Jennie, your book included some abuse as well. Tell us about that. Both of you, I have to tell you that when I read that both of those discussions of abuse really affected me. I mean, I thought it really was very poignant. So, Jennie, tell us about the abuse that you talk about in your book.
Well, I have two main characters, and the secondary character is Charlie Sidlow, who is a an FBI agent who is asking my main character to spy on her old lover because they believe he's selling secrets, atomic secrets, to the Russians. And he has a backstory, and his backstory is that during the war, he was a Japanese prisoner of war. And when I read I read a lot of first-person narratives about what it was like to be a Japanese prisoner of war. And it was so horrifying, so unbelievable. The Japanese never signed the Geneva Convention, so they could treat the prisoners any way they wanted. And to come back from that and try and lead a normal life, I mean, he's lost the use of one of his hands because of torture. And he's somebody who has, suffered a lot. And so I wanted him to have this story of, being very uncertain about his life. And he's also been heartbroken by the woman he came back to, who turned her back on him when she saw what had happened to him. And so, my idea was to bring together two people who were kind of birds with broken wings and see if they could heal each other, and actually ended up with three birds with broken wings in the story. The man she's also spying on has his own backstory.
Yeah. So you both have mentioned a lot of research. Tell us about what it takes to research and what kind of research you did for your book. Julie?
Well, Claire was married to a very powerful politician and a very powerful political family, kind of second only to the Kennedys. So she had access to a lot of money. And at the beginning of the book, Claire is making a plan to leave. She's had enough. She doesn't want to call him out. She doesn't want to, she knows what happens to women who call out powerful men, and especially men like her husband, Rory, who is beloved across the country. He's sort of like the only child of a very beloved former senator. And she knew people wouldn't really believe her. And she thinks that the people who would believe her wouldn't be enough to really make her life worth it. We've all seen what happens to women who do this. And so she makes a plan to disappear, and she has it all planned out. She's going to be at a campaign event in Detroit, and she's going to slip across the border. She's got a fake passport, a fake ID, fake, everything. She's just going to become a new person. And, she had to pay for that. And so I had to do a lot of research as far as like, well, where do you get stuff like that? So I talked to someone that I know at the FBI, and he kind of told me like, it's really, really like the Russian mafia is sort of the only game in town for fake IDs at this point. There's no longer, some teenager in a garage somewhere laminating a picture over an old driver's license. That just doesn't happen anymore. And so, I had to do a lot of research on drug making, because Eva has her backstory and what she does and how she's kind of navigated in the world and the things that have happened to her. And so, my first book was about genetics, and I did a ton of research for genetics, and I wanted really, really, really to stay away from scientific research. And so even though Eva is like a chemistry prodigy, and she makes these drugs that she sells to college students, I pretty much decided that I wasn't going to dig too deep into that part of it, because I really didn't want to do any more science research. So that was the research that I did.
So, well, just one follow-up question. How long did it take you to do the research and to write the book?
For me, it took about a year and a half to draft and get the book ready for sale. So probably about a year and a half. Yeah.
Well, Jennie, you did a lot of research about the Manhattan Project, and then there's a lot of things about just the 1950s that a lot of people are not aware of in terms of fashion and habits. Tell us about that.
Well, there was a lot of research involved. I mean, first I read about how the atomic bomb was made. So I read a ton of books about that, and it was hard for me. I may be the daughter of a scientist, but I didn't entirely absorb all her abilities. And DNA doesn't always come through. I did a lot of research about the era. And one of the best things that I do when I'm writing about an era is to read newspapers and magazines of that era. Mm-hmm. So it was really important for me to see, what were people eating? What were people wearing? What did it cost? What were the attitudes? So that was very important. I read about atomic spies because there really was an atomic spy at the University of Chicago at that time who sold secrets to the Russians and was never caught. They knew that he did it because there was a code broken. The Russian code had been broken, and they could tell there was a spy in place. But they had to find other evidence in order to indict him, and they never were able to do that before he slipped away to England and spent the rest of his life there. And then in 1995, they released that information. So everybody knew, yes, he was a spy, and he was a very old man at that time, and they just left him alone. So I had to read about that. And then I spoke to an FBI agent who was in his 90s, who had been at the Chicago office of the FBI. And that was just fascinating to speak to him, what they did, what it was like, what the attitudes were after the war. So he was there literally in 1950 in Chicago when I was writing about Charlie.
How long did your research last?
Well, I'm a slowpoke apparently. It took the whole thing, the research I do up front, but I continue to do it as, all the way through my writing. You're probably the same way, Julie. Yeah. So, it took me altogether 5 years to write this book. I wrote and rewrote it. I streamlined it. I strengthened places. I tend to write in layers. It's just the way I work.
Do you work on more than one book at a time?
No. No. Never.
No.
Well, it would seem like that to me, but for over that period of time, that it would be, could be.
I used to write really fast, but I'm older and more thoughtful, and my inner editor is very noisy and gets in the way sometimes, and so it just takes me longer. And I've just decided it just has to be done when I think it's done. And I think the best thing a writer can do is bring it to the point where you say, "Okay, it's done. I feel good about this, no matter what happens. I feel good."
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely agree. And every book's different. So, it takes however long it takes. And, depending on the subject area, depending on what you have to research, depending on, how clear you are in your head about what the book is about, really, every book's different.
Yeah.
It's true. How clear it is in your head. That's a very good point, Julie.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, so tell us a little about, these were all strong women, Claire and Eve, and then Rosalind in Jennie's book. So tell us a little about, but they were also flawed, and they had to make sacrifices. So tell us about that. Julie?
Well, Claire and Eva are very, very different. So Claire kind of came, Claire came from a very poor background. It was just her mother and her younger sister. And her mother and younger sister died in a car accident when Claire was in college. So Claire's pretty much alone in the world. And, kind of right probably for targeting from a man who is maybe looking to have a wife that he can kind of isolate and domineer and sort of control in the way that Rory wants to control Claire. Eva was a foster child. Her mother gave her up at an orphanage when she was 2. She grew up not really knowing anything about her family at all, and was a science prodigy though, and so earned a scholarship to Berkeley, where she falls in love with the quarterback of the football team, who takes advantage of her and convinces her to make methamphetamines in the chemistry lab. And what ends up happening is she ends up getting expelled, and he ends up, with like a 2-game suspension. So again, it's sort of like the double standard for women of, these are the expectations that we place on everybody, but the consequences are different depending on who you are and what kind of level of privilege you have. So Eva didn't have anybody to speak out for her. And so as a result, she kind of lost everything that she had dreamed of having. So, they both sort of are very flawed. And again, like any of us, when we're in a difficult situation, we make decisions the best we can with the information we have at the time. And with hindsight, you look back and you think that maybe wasn't the best decision that I could have made. And both Eva and Claire, I think, own that and feel like they can sort of fight their way out of that, though. They don't accept it. There's a difference, I think, between owning it and accepting it. And they weren't going to accept it. So,
Jennie, tell us about Rosalind.
So Rosalind was really successful as a scientist and loved what she did. And, suddenly she's, after the bomb was dropped, she was deeply, deeply depressed, as in fact were many scientists. People don't realize this, but 70 scientists from the Manhattan Project signed a petition to Harry S. Truman begging him not to drop the bomb. Mm-hmm. It never got to him because the Secretary of State didn't believe in it. So he went ahead and dropped the bomb. And the bomb was created to fight the Germans. When the Germans were out of the war, they had surrendered. They could have not used that bomb and still possibly ended the war with the Japanese, but that wasn't the decision that was made. So she was deeply depressed, and this man whom she loved betrayed her. I think both Julie's and my books are also about betrayal. And this man betrayed her and got her fired and said she was emotionally unstable. Again, something that you might believe of a woman, especially in those days, and not so much a man, which is incredibly unfair. So when the book begins, she's selling antique jewelry at Marshall Field's department store in Chicago. She's lost everything. She's lost the science that really was her truest love. She lost the man that she loved, and she lost her job, her place in the world, and her confidence. And so she's really kind of broken and very unsure of herself, very kind of fragile, more fragile than you would want a strong woman to be. But she still knows underneath it is this desire to do something with science, that science calls to her and terrifies her, because science killed 200,000 people because of something she helped to create. At the same time, science was an answer. In 1949, the polio vaccine was invented, and it was just like it is now with the pandemic. It was the answer to a lot of parents' prayers, because kids were, stricken with polio, and it was a terrifying, terrifying disease. A lot of them died or never were able to get out of iron lungs or couldn't walk. And so science was king at that time. People felt science would solve all problems. And so she was drawn to science. She was terrified of science.
Yeah, all of these women really didn't have. They felt they were empowered in one way, but in the other way, their circumstances had just happened to them. They were not having a say in their lives. Julie, your book has two women, Eva and Claire. You mentioned the fact that they were very different. Which of them did you enjoy writing more? And what was one more challenging than the other?
Yeah, definitely. Claire was very easy to write. Eva was very hard to write. Part of that, I think, was because I was writing Eva in third person, and I just had a hard time getting close to her in that way. But I eventually sort of unlocked that. And because I did, I think that of the two characters, I actually prefer Eva. I feel like I like her more. I love Claire. She's a great character, and I'm definitely rooting for her. But Eva really lives a little bit closer to my heart, I think.
Yeah, Jennie, you write about two men, Tom Weaver and Charlie Sidlow. So what was your take on which did you enjoy writing more, and what was more challenging?
Well, Charlie, I was in Charlie's head for, it was one of, I did third person, but you were in very close third person with both Rosalind and Charlie. And so I knew Charlie better. And it's very weird how Charlie came to me. It's just like he came to me whole cloth. I knew everything about him, and I can't explain that. I knew he was 6'7", and that he had lost the use of one of his hands, and that he was from the Polish neighborhood in Chicago, and that he was somebody who was really brokenhearted hearted, but, really unable to connect in some ways, but had a family and a community behind him who cared about him at the same time. So he was easier for me to write. Weaver needs to be more of a cipher because of the plot. And we don't know, is he selling secrets to the Russians? Is he not? Why did he do what he did to Roz when he claims he loved her? And now he's begging to come back to her. And Charlie says, you need to see him because we think he's selling secrets to the Russians. Why is he begging to see the woman that he betrayed so horribly? And why does he think she's going to say yes to him? Mm-hmm. And, that's all what gets unraveled in the story. So, yes, I love Charlie. I fell in love with Charlie. I find it really hard to move on to my next book without Charlie. and actually,
is there a sequel?
Well, people have asked me that. A lot of people have asked me that. I don't see it right now. I suppose there could be. People want to know what happens to Charlie and Roz. But, my editor fell in love with Charlie so much, and she was pregnant when she bought the book, and she named her son Charlie.
Oh
wow.
That's sweet. I love that.
Jennie, did you, in your, let's see, excuse me. When you made, Jennie, you made the statement that Weaver was once her drug. Tell us about that. And then, Julie, tell us if you think either Eva or Claire had their own type of drug. Jennie, go first.
Yeah, I think for Rosalind, Weaver was her first real relationship. She was very naive when she met him. She'd been one of those, I always said she was the, men don't make passes at girls who wear glasses. And she was just very brainy. And men were always put off by that. Remember, it was, 1940s, and men didn't know how to handle women who were very, very smart and were intimidated by her. But here was a man who really was drawn to her because of her brains and, was proud of her for her brains. And so she was tremendously drawn to him, and she had a sexual awakening, and she, found a part of herself she didn't know she had. She was never a very physical person. She was more of a brain person. And, even there's a part about how her gym teacher tried to wake her up to the fact she had a body, but until she met Weaver, she wasn't fully aware of what her body meant to her. And I think that does happen sometimes to brainy women. So she was addicted to him. And it was very hard when he just suddenly, so shockingly, withdrew from her. And of course, there's a reason, which you have to read the book to know what it was. But she doesn't understand why they had such a tremendous connection, and then he's gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Julie, tell us if either Eva or Claire had their own type of drug?
I don't think so. I think, Claire wants one thing in the book, and that's to be free. That's to be done with Rory, to be safe, to live a happy life. She wants something simple. She doesn't need money. She doesn't need the fancy house and the fancy cars and the house full of, people that wait on her and know where she is every minute of the day. She wants a teeny tiny little place with, very simple things. And so, if anything, her dream is her drug. It's sort of what drives her forward in believing that she would be able to get what she wants. For Eva, I think her drug, aside from the actual physical drugs that she made, I think for a long time, Eva liked her job. It paid very well. It was easy for her to do. It was relatively safe the way that she had set it up. Her clientele is very, boxed into the university life, and she's not dealing with a bunch of strung out addicts. She's not, she has one contact person that she works with, and so her life is pretty settled, and she's making very, very good money. And she has a plan also to kind of retire at some point. She's going to leave and take her money and go somewhere else and not make drugs anymore. Like, that's her plan. And then of course things happen that get in the way of that. So I think for both of the women, they both had a dream, they both had a goal, and someone or something along the way interrupted that.
Okay. We've got one question, and this is a good time to ask our audience to feel free to ask questions. one question was this person would like to hear more about the reliable woman narrator. She hadn't heard that term before, and it seems important. Tell us about what you know about that.
Well, I write in the thriller genre, and as you know, the Gone Girl phenomena of that unreliable female narrator that is so fantastically done, and so many books do such a great job of it. But I also am a mother, and I'm a teacher, and I feel like I have an obligation to represent women on the page that reflects the women that I know. And I feel like in this time, in our world, our political climate right now, I think it's really important that we're careful how we talk about women and how we portray them. And I feel like for this book, I can't say what's going to happen in the future, but for this particular book, I really wanted to focus on reliable female narrators. They're not hysterical, they're not crazy, they don't have a mental illness, they're not alcoholics. They're just women who are caught in circumstances that are, unacceptable to them any longer. And so when I was revising this book, I was watching the Kavanaugh hearings, and, it just made me think of all the brave women out there who come forward and they speak out and they say these things and they do these things. And I think there's a line in the book about how the truth of a woman is never equal to the truth of a man. They're not considered equal. They don't have equal weight. And so that was really what I wanted to point out in the story, was that, women aren't bossy, we're strong. Women aren't shrill, we speak clearly. And so how we portray women in books and how we speak about them, I think kind of designs how women are portrayed and thought about in the world. So that felt important to me for this book.
Well, and Jennie, you made the point in our earlier discussion about the fact that really times haven't changed. I mean, Roz was faced with a lot of the same treatment that Julie's characters were.
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, true, and shocking. I mean, I thought the ERA would have been passed back in 1968. So I'm a little confused about why we don't have equal rights or equal pay, or, are treated the same. And I was in advertising for many, many years. And, there's one part in my story where she's in the lab and nobody listens to her.
Right.
And she realizes she needs to lower her voice and speak more softly when she gets upset, or men just can't hear her. And that came out of my own experience, because I was a creative director. I had a lot of people working for me, but if I wanted them to listen, I had to lower my voice. I had to say, look, guys, we have a problem here. If I said, you guys, we can't do that, they absolutely shut me out. Men just could not hear that. And, we're still fighting the same battles.
And I underlined that in your book, Jennie. So,
I loved that line too. I read that line and I was like, yeah.
Yeah. We have a question from Holly Connor, and she said, Jennie, you spoke at our book club for Age of Desire, and we adored having you as well as your book. Where do you get your ideas or seeds for stories, and what's up next for you?
Holly, I remember your book club. And thank you for writing it and for watching. It's always a melange of stuff that creates a book. It's never just a single seed of an idea. And like I said, it was my mother and the Manhattan Project, and wanting to write about an era where people weren't truly happy, even though they were supposed to be. So all of that kind of mixed in, and also wanting to write about these people who were broken, who helped heal each other, because I really, atomic love for me, it means, when people think love is just to be happy, but I really think love is about healing. If you find someone who can heal you, then that is true love. That is something that can really help. And we all are broken in certain ways. And so it was something I wanted to write about. As for what I'm doing next, I can only say, because I'm at that point where Julie was talking about not fully getting the idea of the book, not fully clear on it. But I am looking into and interviewing people about the lunch counter sit-ins in Nashville in 1960s, and the early civil rights movement and a girl who's somehow caught up in that. And that really fascinates me.
Yeah, that's really good. Both of your books contain healers, people who serve in the role of. Julie, tell us about some of the healers in your book.
I think the main one is really Liz in Eva's chapters. And Liz is an older professor visiting from Princeton. She is only there for a semester, and she rents the duplex next to Eva. And at first, Eva's kind of like, oh, God, lady, get out of my face, you know. But then something happens that forces Eva to sort of have to take a step back from selling her drugs. And so she kind of befriends Liz and realizes that Liz is really just doesn't want anything from her, doesn't expect anything from her, just wants to be her friend. And Eva realizes she's never really had that before. She's never really been able to open up to someone because she's always had so much to hide. She's always had so much to protect. And Liz is just not interested in any of that. She just wants to be her friend. And so Eva sort of has a relationship with Liz that is sort of like a mother-daughter relationship. And so for someone that never had a mother, who never knew her mother, it was incredibly powerful, I think, for Eva to have just those months with Liz. And then the flip side is that once you have someone that you care about that much, the idea of losing them is horrific, you know? And so Eva has to kind of grapple with that as well.
Yeah. Jennie, I know that Roz and Charlie are turned to be healers for each other, but there were some other healers in your book. Talk about some of the others.
Well, I'm not sure who you're talking about. Are you talking about Louisa?
Louisa and Henry.
Oh, true. Okay. So in my story, again, it's somebody who's lost both her parents, or certainly one of her parents, and her father is not really very available. So her sister and brother-in-law take her in when she's a baby. And Henry is her brother-in-law. And her sister is very unclear about how she feels about taking her in. She feels it's her obligation, but she is iffy about her love for Rosalind. But Henry loves her right away and is somebody who encourages her love of science and believes in her no matter what happens, believes in her even after she is, you know, booted out of her job, and is the one that encourages her. And you know, I really loved his character as well, because he was somebody who, he had no reason to love Roz other than, well, he raised her in a way, he adopted her, but he just was a good soul. And he put up with a lot in the family with Louisa, and that becomes a secondary theme.
Both of your books contain moral dilemmas. Julie, talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think for Eva, the moral dilemma is, you know, she gets kicked out of college and she has nowhere to go, and she's presented with an opportunity to make drugs, to do what she knows how to do, and that it comes very easily to her. And she realizes that it could be a quick and easy way to make money. And, you know, I think the research now on brain development is that your brain is not fully developed until something like 26 years old. And so, you know, Eva is like 21, 22. And she doesn't have anything to fall back on. She doesn't have any family. She has very few friends. She doesn't have any resources at all. And so she takes the opportunity that is in front of her, thinking that it might be a temporary thing, and not knowing that it would pull her well into the future and kind of take over all of her life and pretty much eliminate all of her opportunities. And it sort of was like a vine that crept around her ankles and then around her legs. And then before she knew it, she couldn't move at all until it was too late. So I think that, you know, making those kinds of choices, you can't always look into the future and know, is this the right thing for me to do? And Claire, I think, was a little bit more subtle. You know, she fell in love. She fell in love with a very charming and powerful man from a wonderful family that everybody watched in the pages of People magazine. And, you know, she wanted to be a part of that. You know, her mother and sister had died in a car accident, and it's been the three of them her whole life. And she wanted a family. She wanted those roots. She wanted that history and the traditions. And what she didn't know was that there was a whole dark underside that came along with it. So, you know, I think it's just about choices that you make, and not realizing that when you choose something, you choose all of it, not just the parts you see.
Yeah, that's a good point. Jenny, your characters had to make some moral choices too. Talk about that. We're almost out of time, so and I want to give you an opportunity, both of you, each of you, an opportunity to tell anything else that you'd like about your book.
Okay, I'll make it quick. So the moral dilemma that Rosalind has to face is she's being asked by the FBI to spy on her old lover, whom she does not want to see, whom she feels tremendously betrayed by, whom she does not trust. And she realizes that she may be up against some danger of her own in doing it. And yet, it's something to save her country. I mean, when somebody gives you says, we believe that he's got the information he's passing to the Russians about the hydrogen bomb, which is even worse than what she worked on. And, it could be up to you to make this never happen. You could stop him. It was pretty hard for her to say no, despite the fact that she really just wants to shake it all off and forget about it. She's still in hiding from what happened. So it's a choice that, you think to yourself, would I have had the courage to do that? Would I have done it? And then she gets sucked into the relationship again, which confuses her and makes it hard and makes that moral choice difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Okay, Julie, do you have anything else that we should cover about your book?
No, it's just a story about female empowerment and strong female narrators. That's really like what I want readers like walking away with, was that, that women are strong and we're sane and rational people who, are able to do really amazing things.
Right. Thank you. Jenny?
I would just say that my book is about all kinds of love. It's about, love between, lovers, love between brothers and sisters, love between, children. Like, she loves her niece, and that's something that keeps her afloat. So it's about all kinds of love, and how that kind of helps people move forward is sort of the net that holds them in life. And when the net gets torn, how do you recover? How do you find yourself again? And how do you find that atomic love, which is love that's, indivisible, just like an atom.
Mm-hmm. We didn't ever talk about Zeke, Jenny.
Right. So, and also her best friend, who is a gay man in the 1940s and 50s, when it was just incredibly, unacceptable. And she loves him for who he is. She knows him better than anyone. And they find comfort in each other no matter what.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. One last question quickly from Holly Connor. She said, how have you both adapted to the world of Zoom and virtual book talks? Is it hard, or do you feel you can reach broader audiences?
I think we can reach a broader audience. I mean, I think it's a wonderful thing that, people from all over the country can come and listen in on a book talk. And, friends from far and wide came to my launch party that was on, Zoom, basically. And so I think that while it's hard and it's disappointing, book tours get canceled. I was supposed to go to New York. I was supposed to do a 5-6 city tour, and that got kind of canceled. But the flip side is that, it's very easy to do these events. It's very easy to say yes, which is wonderful, because, when I'm invited to do book clubs, when I'm invited to visit bookstores, I have to figure out, okay, what am I going to do with my kids? And I have to take some time off work. And, I guess how am I going to get this into my schedule? But now I can simply say, sure, send me the link. And, I walk out to my office and join. It's very simple. And then I'm done and I'm home. So I think it's, that's the upside. I miss interacting with readers. I miss signing books. I miss bookstores. I miss all of those things that we love about releasing a book. The energy is sort of hard to match, but I think there are things that, we can hang on to and say, this is okay. It's not great, but it's okay.
Jenny, do you have any thoughts?
I'm grateful we have this opportunity. I mean, and you're right about it reaching a broader audience, because, when I did my launch with Ann Patchett, 1,600 people watched that. And, wow, that would never happen. And I've been able to do my launch in the UK and done a lot of podcasts and a lot of, online things in the UK as well. So that's been great. I really do miss looking people in the eyes and, and talking to them about the book one-on-one. I really do miss that. And I really miss talking to the booksellers, because in my past, book tours, it was making that connection with the booksellers. And then they really want to hand sell your book because they know your heart and soul is in that book. And so that I am mourning a bit, but, I'm just grateful we're able to have the Southern Festival of Books this year. And it would have been rainy and pretty miserable out there if we had it today. So it's a good thing that we're doing it this way.
That's right. And the soup's on when we're finished.
Right. Exactly.
Right. So I want to thank you both for being with us tonight. I tell you, it's been a real pleasure, and I've enjoyed your books. And I encourage and hope the audience will, if you haven't already gotten their books, that you will check it out at Parnassus Books. So,
thank you. Thanks so much for coming, everyone.
Thanks for having us. We're happy to be here.